Hello there YouTube, Eric McRae, Asparagus Party here, and now we are finally moving into the third and final part of this commentary series on Devil May Cry. We're really examining a philosophical kind of concept for Dante and Vergil and the deeper meaning of their characters. And as if you recall from the first video, I raised the question whether it were possible that these are actually two that are one and the same in some way. And moving into the second video, I gave you a lot of backdrop and explanation of certain philosophical concepts of the inner shadow of a person. And now with all that backdrop out of the way, the ground is kind of clear to really explain how I think this works. So where this story actually begins that fills in the explanation of the question is not with the characters Dante and Vergil and not within the universe of Devil May Cry itself, but rather outside with the creator or creators of the series story lore. And what happens when you look at all these kind of Japanese philosophies for the complexity of the human emotional system and predicted reactions and possible reactions to various trauma and stimuli, what you find is through all these themes that these authors, these writers, they are drawing from something 100%. And it's either one of two possibilities. We don't have infinite possibilities for this. So the concepts behind the character for Dante and Vergil, they are either drawn from the self-awareness and self-observation and questioning of the author or authors themselves, or else they are drawn based on sort of reimagination of some kind of historical stories or scripts, or a passed down tradition of, you know, kind of like a Japanese marketing concept for story writing. Like you'd imagine in schools and various colleges, a sort of handbook popular in Japan or something like that, sort of informing the writers, the authors, the mangaka on concepts that are relatable for target audiences. If you're targeting teenagers going through certain situations, more or less volatile in one way or another, you use this type of a story. Here's a few kind of sequences that represent something where you can kind of market out to that and create a kind of artistic product and merchandising and all that, and so on and so forth, according to a great many variations of all those things we see as common tropes and themes in the anime, in the games, and all these things out of the Japanese mind. But getting back to the point of only having two possibilities, actually these two kind of leave us with the same conclusion. So if it's an individual or a bunch of individuals sort of pulling ideas out of themselves, out of their own emotional experiences, traumas, reactions to it on the spot, then what you have is either an individual sort of extracting the character of Dante and Vergil out of himself based on their own meditations, inner observations, and predictions, or sort of a conglomerate group funneling those same kind of experiences in a united dialogue and discussion and working as one entity, pulling Dante and Vergil's character again out of itself. And the other possibility is basically almost the same, only it would go further back to sort of ancestors and meaningful writers, poets, etc. of the past who influenced Japanese culture, you know, a sort of handed down tradition or handed down education and instruction that these people receive, but really you're dealing with then kind of the same thing, just going further back to a more ancient source. So the characters of Dante and Vergil, their way of dealing with situations, their form of self-conduct, manners of speech, it's coming out of some source which is one and the same, either as a group functioning as a composite unity, as one entity, or some person in either the company or history. And now if I say it in this sense, everything I'm saying should make sense to you now. In a very real way, Dante and Vergil are the intellectual and emotional offspring of some author or writer related to this series. And what that actually entails, which is probably universal for just about every major influential character, is that they do not represent something necessarily very new or unique, but more of a fragmentization pulled out of someone's own inner being and internal reflections. So in that sense, those fragments, one type of character interaction series and sequences being Dante, another being Vergil, were both one and the same in the same heart and mind of a person in their sort of exploration of all those various phenomenon of, emotions and interactions and hypothetical situations and typological situations, i.e. reactions to abandonment, like the case with Vergil, reactions to how you talk with women, anything like that, anything and everything really. Now, though I don't personally know the author or writer or authors or writers in any way, though I don't really have any idea of what their source material is actually, if they have any, a particular education system or inspiration of some story of yesteryear, what I do know is that based on glimpses of what we catch in the series and its events, we can sort of fathom concepts that the person has dealt with and sort of reconstruct a bit of what they were thinking or going through. And my observations and thoughts are this. What I believe Vergil represented to the author or writer is a very honor-driven conduct. So imagine yourself as a human being going throughout life, and you encounter various situations that cause an attack or a struggle with your own internal sense of self-esteem or self-respect. In the case of Vergil, the storyline that was introduced in Devil May Cry 5 was very much beginning with his sense of abandonment. His mother didn't come back for him as far as he knew it. And I'm sure that Vergil's character development in terms of how far he got driven into this sort of fall to darkness archetypal narrative, it would have had to be a lot more events, there would have had to be a lot more events happening in his life, grieving him and tormenting him, than just the thing with his mother and his early childhood with Dante related to that. We can assume that at some point, based on the story, going through a period of being separated and isolation and having to fend for himself in some way, that Vergil dealt with people or demons or some kind of entities that were trying to hinder him, break him down, take advantage of his vulnerability. Who knows what that entails? Use him, manipulate him, dominate him, or something of the sort. And this is heavily hinted to in the dialogue that Nero shares with V, this sort of fragment of Vergil made into its own person in Devil May Cry 5. V and openly admitting that he's the part of Vergil that wanted to be loved and protected, basically sheltered from that ugly sort of dog eats dog concept of a world, survival of the fittest. He wanted to be sheathed and covered and hidden far from view from that ugly element of life. However, falling short of that ideal of feeling protected and shielded from the harsher elements of characters in the world and the world itself, leaves someone like Vergil feeling bitter or hurt or attacked or victimized, and it causes a potential gap for a certain reaction to that hurt and pain to manifest, which becomes the way that Vergil very much characterizes himself. So if you look closely at the kind of dialogue and overall characterization and stylization of Vergil, he seems to be trying to conduct himself with a posture of the strong, silent type, and also very much the serious type. He talks when necessary if left to his own devices. He's not the type to, say, clown around in the same way Dante is. it's not that there's no room for sort of a more goofy, kind of funny side of Vergil or any manifestation of it, but that aspect of character development, though it may exist in him, is highly, highly suppressed. So it only comes out for a brief instance in, say, an interaction in Devil May Cry 3 when Dante approaches him and makes the joke about everything he's doing in that event being kind of likened to a party or throwing a bash, and Vergil giving a kind of playful, passive-aggressive response. I suspect, for example, that if you heard Vergil interact with a woman, even a woman he might in some way be deeply attracted to, for example, potentially whoever he met and got together with to cause the birth of Nero, I think the way Vergil would interact with a woman would be extremely radically different from the way Dante would interact with a woman. I think it would be way less playful and kind of flirtatious, and maybe he might go for something like a more knightly protector aesthetic or something kind of functionally different from Dante, who's more likely to opt for the playboy kind of routine. A character like Vergil, I think what their overall style usually indicates is a desire to protect weak people or weak things, and to take power to enact a form of employing a moral role of the protector or the honorable protector even. So what you see is that the cause of this kind of mindset is a direct clash with characters like Dante, for example, who are expressing sort of different characterization of how they approach the same stimuli and problems. Vergil perceives the character and nature of Dante to be too much likened to the people that he feels his previous goal of self was mistreated, abused by, and humiliated by. The type of people that he's not going to let them go, he's not going to let them off the hook, and he's certainly not intending to let them rub off on him too much. Though there's more challenge involved when he's dealing with Dante because he has an emotional connection and a relationship with Dante as a brother. So in all likelihood, Vergil's constant portrayal as a character so thirsty for power, always saying that he needs more power, even to the point of being willing to sacrifice all of his human traits for it, is reflecting the mindset of someone who never wants to be humiliated, betrayed, belittled, or abandoned again, to feel they have a power over that, to not feel the pain of it, but also very much to probably have the power to be able to protect those who are weak like he once was from the characters he perceives to be their potential assailants or abusers. And in this way, because he sees kind of a likeness in the characterization of his brother Dante to the people he's had issues with, he kind of treats and sees Dante as a threat, I suspect. Now, you see very much with Dante, obviously, a very similarly powerful, and yet in terms of the moral aesthetic of all the ethics for how to do things, how to approach how you talk, how to approach how you walk, how to approach how you interact and fight, and the kind of taunts you may or may not use in a battle, anything and everything, Dante's clearly very different. He's got the more playful, cope with the sufferings using humor and skits kind of mentality. So obviously there's a great deal of friction there, but here's something I'm going to propose that is rather intriguing and already should be leaving a glimpse of room for reconciliation between the two. Despite the friction, despite the battle between their character traits and characterization, I don't think that Vergil and Dante have greatly dissimilar goals. Actually, I think overall, in a very real way, though what they tolerate and accept and allow or disallow is different, they have the same overall goal for the sort of well-being and protection of humanity, of the weak, the fighting off of the demons, and so on and so forth. I don't think Vergil really wants to have the earth flooded and overrun by demons, for example. I think he just wants to be the strong enough person to be able to never be subject to them or abusive humans or anyone, and perhaps protect those weak ones. I think Dante, very similar, wants to protect all the humans from the demons, and of course there is that other complex duality playing in where Vergil is seen to be more reminiscent of the demonic aspect of chasing after power, thirsting of power. Dante more reflective of chasing after humans, chasing after relationship, but really again two sides of the same coin and not absent of the other traits. In other words, if you considered that power thirst as something only applicable to Vergil, it would not be correct. It's equally capable for Dante to take that route at any moment and chase and manifest those principles and have a reversal, and the same stands very much the case for Vergil, which really colors and highlights kind of the purpose and point of that very famous self-dialogue where he really goes and puts forward the question, what would have happened if from the beginning on that day their roles were reversed? Obviously Vergil began to catch on to these things. However, at this point there was not enough in and of that kind of dialogue itself to bring reconciliation between these two hostile components of the same kind of overall goal and character will. And now, with all that foundation laid down, we'd ask the question, if you consider Dante and Vergil as sort of representations of within a person's own self of two kind of very polar opposite approaches of the same end that, despite their same goal, have too much dissimilarity to reconcile, are always going to end up in hostility and a fight for dominance with one another, ending in the death of one of them 10 times out of 10. How do you bring in a reconciliation, a peace and a harmony, and even a friendship between these two? And the answer is you introduce a third party that bears traits of both people, that shares connection with both people. And this is where in Devil May Cry 5 you enter the true significance of Nero. So the super cool thing with Nero is that he has an extremely functional relationship with Dante as an uncle character to him. Their relationship is close. They got to know each other through the course of Devil May Cry 4 and the whatever events were afterward. And you know, they formed a really respect for one another. Nero's willing to hear counsel and advice from Dante, and Dante respects Nero's intentions, goodwill for, you know, protection of humans or whatever else, and his power. And now you enter in Vergil, who is the blood father of Nero, and the dynamic gets more complicated. So imagine what this would represent to Vergil, from Vergil's perspective. So the person in the world who would most represent Vergil would have naturally been his son Nero, who he didn't even know he had a son, but now he knows. And what you realize, if you think about it deeply, the one who helped Nero the most, the one who kept this son, who is a representation of yourself, safe the most from harm, literally in fights with demons and other forces, the one who guided and empowered Nero the most to become the strongest and kind of best he could be and help guide him on the path of heroism, so to speak, was none other than Dante. And now if you're Vergil, you take a look at yourself and you realize, despite the cool moments that happen with this fragment of yourself, V, the reality is Vergil attacked Nero, cut off the arm, you know, sort of reformed it into the Yamato, took the Yamato away, whereas Dante was willing to entrust a sacred family heirloom to him. So Dante gives to Nero. Vergil saw that he was only taking away. And in taking away from Nero, since in a very real way he's your own son, your own flesh and blood, you know, part of your own personality and soul, your descendant, your offspring, it's like stealing from yourself. And if you meditate as Vergil here and think about it, you're able to find room for reconciliation with Dante now through Nero. Nero is able to bear traits of both Dante and Vergil and create a working discussion and dialogue and trust and willingness to lay down the protector role on kind of the part of both and kind of buddy up again. It is all mediated through Nero. He is the connection, he is the bridge between Dante and Vergil in this series. And in a way, this is kind of relatable to the general concept of the nuclear family: father, husband, wife, mother, children. Though obviously not having any sexualized part of it or anything grotesque like that. But in the sense that you have the battle sometimes between the masculine and the feminine traits, and if left as two different entities, even if they had the same goal, because of their differences, there would tend to be an innate hostility, and one would dominate and crush and destroy the other. But the two are in a very real way able to find reconciliation through that. When they get together and work cooperatively, new life is birthed, and in the united traits of both into that new life, their children, they are able to find appreciation of each other's aspects through that. Now obviously this is very different in a very real way from Dante, Vergil, and Nero, but there's a similar effect. They're able to find reconciliation with the differences through someone who's part of both sides and sees both sides. And I think furthermore, within sort of the complex unity and diverse construct of the various interacting elements of the human psyche and psychological components, it may represent this unique dynamic within one's own self that in a way we kind of may actually have at points a Trinitarian kind of structure inside ourselves. So for example, you have again two traits that actually in a way share the same goal and the same hope, but have a potential for conflict and open hostility with one another: the temporal and the eternal, the limited and the limitless, the spiritual and the material. And what you need is a way, if you want to have reconciliation of both, to be able to succeed in both the temporal and the eternal, to succeed in both the spiritual and the material, to succeed in two hostile components. The third element is needed, a sort of bridge to cover the gap and connect the two. And that is what you perhaps find in some segmentation of the human consciousness, is the potential manifestation of three different personas interacting and working together to keep a temporal state and an eternal state working together in one purpose, where it would normally be reckoned as a contradiction along with other things. And now, to finalize this and the total relevancy of it all, to give the full story, it really shows forth that at some point someone, probably Japanese or an ancestor from which Japanese people derived wisdom, something of the sort, someone had a struggle within themselves. Some human had a struggle in reconciling conflicting components of values and moral principles within themselves, and idealizations and moral aesthetics and moral aesthetic goals for how they would be as a person in an eternal state. Having an eternal state in this sense, though potentially a lot more than this sense, kind of referring to having a set of routines and habits that you execute always 100% the same in the same situations 100% of the time. And this person struggling with the finalization of their own character as a human delved into a realm where they thought of how they could picture this out, how they could sort of put it into a visual form and relay the concept and understand it deeper for themselves, and how to bring peace amongst their own division in their own soul, they derived concepts like what you see in Devil May Cry, Dante, Vergil, and Nero. Now, I know this is a long video. We're almost done here, I promise. There's just one avenue not left explained, one gap not yet filled in that must be finalized first. And the question would remain, okay, I get what you're saying with all this, but what about Devil May Cry, the reimagination? You know, that ugly duckling of the Devil May Cry series that stands out like a sore thumb. So as I mentioned before, this is very much a alternate universe and a manifestation of completely different human struggles or tendencies. And I don't have to go into depth in explaining every character of it. Using a comparison with Vergil will be sufficient. So the Vergil of the Devil May Cry series, represented in 1, 3, and 5, he has a trait about him that implies sort of a ability to show sympathy or empathy or compassion that's somewhat more relatable. He has that character of being a hurt or a broken man trying to reclaim himself, so to speak. Trying to reclaim something that was lost, trying to return to the Garden of Eden in a sense. Most humans are able to look at this as a villain that they can't really fully hate in their heart. That's the story implication. But what Vergil does in the reimagination is quite different. The stance for what he's doing is quite different. There's less justification for pursuit of power to dominate, to rule. Really, what is manifested out of the Vergil of DMC, the reimagination, is more of a radical ego manifestation. It's somebody who's literally just looking down on others and doesn't feel themselves part of the human experience. In the mind of this Vergil, who would in a lot of ways come off as more villainous from the path he took here, he is above and everyone else is beneath. You're not even of the same cloth to contend with him. In a very real comparison, this Vergil's mindset would be more reflective of Aizen from Bleach when he speaks of himself calling himself essentially a fourth dimensional being, and that you wouldn't be able to sense his power level unless he willingly brought it down. Difference being Vergil would kind of have this attitude of only his way of ruling and his mind to rule and his power to rule is fit to sort of govern the affairs of humanity. But unlike Aizen, he doesn't exactly have the power to back it up, being that Dante is formidably able to overpower him. It's quite a different thing. And again, the Dante of the series is quite a bit different too. So in essence, when you deal with that Devil May Cry, you have to treat it as a different animal or a different beast in a manner of speech entirely. It requires a whole different analysis and a closer investigation that a lot of the conclusions for those characters are going to be different from what they were for the ones of the main series. They don't necessarily have a perfect correlation or a one-to-one correlation, even where characters have the same name and the same fighting style. And now, with that all out of the way, I can conclude and say that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for giving me a piece of your time and a piece of your ear. God bless you. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello there, Eric McRae here, Asparagus Party. Just want to share a friendly reminder that if you enjoy the content I'm producing, it's very helpful for me if you would like the videos and subscribe to my channel, and also that if you're willing or interested in donating to help my channel growth, I do have a donor box page and a link in every video description. With that said, let's get into the video. Thank you very much for your time.